I want to welcome you to today's book launch. Today we are discussing the book Disputing Discipline, Child Protection, Punishment and Piety in Zanzibar Schools by Dr. Franziska Fay. But before we begin, a brief word of welcome from the Managing Director of our research network, Rebecca Schmidt.
On behalf of Normative Orders, I would like to send out a warm welcome to you participating in our book launch today. And I would like to send a particularly warm welcome to the author of the book, Dr. Franziska Fay, our former postdoc, who's been writing Disputing Discipline, Child Protection, Punishment and Piety in Zanzibar Schools, and what we'll be talking about today. Franziska Fay has been a postdoc at Normative Orders for quite some while, doing a research project called Multi-Religious Utopias, Youth Secularization, Islamic Education Across the Western Indian Ocean World. And we are happy that even after now she's a junior professor in Mainz, she's still keeping tight connections with Normative Orders, and we are very happy to host her book launch today. And I would like to also especially welcome our commentator, Dr. Claudia Seymour, and I'm really happy that the book and the comment will take place at Normative Orders today. Unfortunately, I can't be here. I will be on vacation this week, but I would love to be there, and I wish you all a very interesting discussion with Franziska's book. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon at Normative Orders.
Yeah, Disputing Discipline explores how the efforts of global and local child rights activists in Zanzibar school systems to abolish corporal punishment are changing the moral and political landscape of the archipelago. By giving equal weight to the perspectives of children and adults, Franziska Fay explores what child protection means for Zanzibari children, who must negotiate their lives at the intersections of universalized and local child protection efforts as they grow into pious and responsible adults. Through a visual and participatory ethnographic approach that foregrounds the voices of young people through their poems, drawings, and photographs, combined with an in-depth analysis of the Swahili language, Fay shows how children's views and experiences can transform our understanding of child protection. This book reflects that policymakers and practitioners need to understand child protection beyond the political meaning of the term and address the realities of children's lives to avoid unintentionally compromising the well-being of young people. In arguing for the need to decolonize the child protection apparatus in Zanzibar, Fay provides a critical addition to the existing discourse that questions the hegemony of universal certainties, such as children's rights, not to invalidate them, but to fulfill their assurances better. Before we get into the discussion, I would like to say a few words about the book's author. Dr. Franziska Fay is an assistant professor of anthropology focusing on political anthropology at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. She is a former postdoctoral fellow of the research center Normative Orders. Her thematic focuses include political processes, childhood and youth, development, cooperation and conflict, diasporas and affiliations, protection and punishment, and Islamic education. Her regional focus is primarily on East Africa, Zanzibar, Tanzania and Kenya, and the Arabian Peninsula, including Oman. Later, we will hear a commentary on the book by Dr. Claudia Seymour. Dr. Seymour is a senior researcher with the Center on Conflict, Development and Peacebuilding at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. Her research investigates resilience to all forms of violence and how young people engage with conflict, adversity, and peace. She has many years of experience working primarily in conflict-affected environments with multiple United Nations bodies and NGOs, including UNICEF, the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, the UN Sanctions Committee mandated group of experts on the DRC, Save the Children, and Oxfam. While most of her experience pertains to sub-Saharan Africa, her research also covers young people in the Middle East, and now focuses on the concerns of young migrants in Europe. And with that, I would like to hand over to Franziska.
Thank you so much, Regina. Give me one moment to share my screen with you and then. Right, can everybody see my presentation? Go back to the beginning. There we go. Okay. All right, I hope you can all hear me well. Thank you very much, Regina, for this wonderful introduction. Thank you, Rebecca, in absence, for your warm welcome to this book launch. Thanks to everybody who's joined today, who's taken time out of their day to go with me over the book and to be present in this virtual space. Thank you to Anke Harm, Susanne Bernhard, Christopher Hamish for also helping with organizing this launch, and to everybody at Normative Orders, where, as Rebecca already mentioned, over the last couple of years as a postdoctoral research fellow, I was able to write the book, to rewrite the thesis into a book, and to have that opportunity, which is so rare, to actually spend time to produce this outcome. And I'm really grateful for that. Thank you also to Rutgers University Press for being a great publisher, to my supervisor, Christopher Davis, who is here today, which I'm particularly excited about, and who's been the absolute key mentor in this whole process, to Emma Crew, my other supervisor on the dissertation, to Save the Children, who've been the key collaborators on this project. And lastly, but not least, to Claudia for agreeing to give a comment on the book, on the book overall, for taking time to read the book and to share some insights from her extraordinary work and point of view that's been tremendously inspiring for my own work. I'm really, really appreciative that you're here today as well. So what I'll do over the next 20 minutes or so is I'll give you a bit of a background about what the book is about and why I wrote it. Then I'll give you an overview of the chapters and go into what they are about and say something about my methodology. And finally, I'll outline what I hope ideally for the book to do. So this book is my first book, and it came out of the PhD research, as I said, that I did at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the SOAS in London between 2013 and 2017. But I first started getting interested in child protection in Zanzibar in 2012 and the year before, after I had briefly done some work with the German Development Corporation and with Save the Children in Malawi and in Germany on child protection myself. And it were these practical experiences in international development and specifically in child protection that left me with a lot of questions. Questions about contextual sensitivity, about the depoliticization of children's lives, about language, discourses and translations, and most pressingly about children's own perspectives on programs that aim to protect them better in their societies. Then when I was in Zanzibar in that same year in 2012, and at that time I'm still very much as a language student learning Swahili and working on that, I met up with the staff at the Save the Children office, where child protection and especially the protection from physical and humiliating punishment had become a main focus. And among many different things, Save the Children was then in the process of setting up what they call a child protection system, of which some sections you see in the photos on this slide, which was the child protection unit, and a so-called unit for alternative discipline, which would later become two of the key field sites for my own research while I was in Zanzibar town. So from them, I learned much about what their child protection programs in Zanzibar aimed to do, what child protection meant for them as an organization, and what challenges they were facing as children's rights actors who were trying to improve the lives of children. What started here was a conversation about child protection that brought together our different but certainly complementary views from anthropology and international development. And I'm quite pleased that this conversation is still going on today, and I'll return to that a bit later. So this is how my own personal questions about children's rights work and children's views on it, combined with those that I encountered in Zanzibar through child protection actors, together with my own love and interest in the Swahili language, brought me to anthropology, which seemed an accommodating place from which to explore these intersections from. Now, like the title suggests, this book is not just about what international organizations understand as, say, child protection, but it's rather about the many different understandings of and approaches to child protection and corporal punishment specifically, as well as about ideas about being young, being disciplined, being pious in Zanzibar more broadly. The argument that I lay out in this book that internationally initiated child protection programs do actually not always succeed at protecting children better. And that in order to better understand why this is so, and the conflicts that are also inherent in child protection, we need to understand first what it means to be a child. And I follow that claim that in order to make child protection interventions safer for children ultimately, and to avoid that programs unintentionally compromise rather than improve children's lives, policymakers and practitioners need to take seriously and respond to the realities of children's lives, that they need to attend to the contexts in which corporal punishment is understood to make sense, or is even itself considered protective, and that they need to understand child protection more broadly and beyond a policy sense of the term only. And in the book, I build and follow the various paths that link to this argument by exploring questions like what are children's and adults' own understandings of childhood, personhood, discipline, punishment, and protection in educational settings? Why do well-intending child protection interventions face opposition in Zanzibar? What are possibilities for decolonizing child protection? And how can child protection ultimately become more protective? So I didn't write this book to find out whether child protection in Zanzibar works or whether it doesn't work, or whether child protection interventions should exist at all. My aim was neither to denounce child protection completely, nor to exclusively help policymakers and development actors to have people accept their programs better. But I did write the book to emphasize the need of engaging also with categories that are often assumed to be beyond the need of critical investigation, such as child protection. And I wrote it with the hope to potentially contribute to decrease the negative effects that child protection programs, even if unintentionally, may have on children's lives that they set out to improve. And I also wrote it to explore and to think about how child protection, or what that term is understood to mean in development contexts, operates as a system. And how this system, if we accept that it exists, may be thought about differently and ultimately serve children better. So let's move into the book. I begin the book by outlining the context of child protection and physical chastisement in a global context and in Zanzibar specifically, and point out why Zanzibar as a case study is interesting for such a discussion, precisely because of the interplay of questions of child rearing, of violence, of international development, of religion and poverty, and of law. And that also apply to many other contexts beyond the archipelago. And alongside these contextual matters, I outline my methodology and the methodological approach I chose to work with while I was on fieldwork in Zanzibar town for a period of 18 months in total between 2014 and 2015, was a specifically child-centered one and one that hoped to be child-friendly as well. And stemming from this, the critical data this book builds on and speaks to are very centrally the children's own views and commentary and the creative productions that came out of these processes. Among the key field sites of my research were 4 primary schools and 2 Quranic schools in Zanzibar town, where I worked with 60 children in total between the ages of 9 and 17. In every school, out of the 6 schools, I worked with a group of 10 children each on the meanings of being young and being safe. And very practically, this meant that I met up with them every week to engage them in participatory and creative research methods such as photography or photo voice, drawing, poetry, and story writing that I had chosen to work with, and of which some of the visuals you will see throughout this presentation. The more conventional anthropological part of the methodology then consisted, of course, of participant observation, which entailed sitting for hours in the research schools to observe, spending time in people's homes, at Save the Children's field office, where I attended many child protection meetings, in the government ministries, and with religious institutions that were involved in these processes. And in total, I here conducted 48 semi-structured interviews and countless informal conversations with teachers, parents, religious leaders, imams, sheikhs, communities, authorities, sheikhs, ministers, and child protection actors. Now, in the book, I reflect on this methodological approach mostly in regard to the ethical challenges that its application entailed when I translated it into practice during field work, and specifically while working with children. And I hope for that to feed into a critique that keeps asking why, and particularly how, it is that we're doing research with children in anthropology and across other fields. And how, stemming from that, we can transcend tropes of children's voice by centering the unspoken and the unspeakable, as Spiro recently put it, and how we can really figure out continuously with Christian Cheney's aim, how to continue to get anthropology to take childhood seriously. After this general setup, we then come to the first chapter, which is called Being Young in Zanzibar. And in this chapter, I outline what the book is about before anything else. And that is what it means to be a child in the archipelago. To explore those meanings, I reconstruct what in Zanzibar, the period we commonly refer to as childhood, is understood to mean, where, when, and how it takes shape, and how it is negotiated in relation to other children and adults. And after doing that, I bring that into dialogue with what childhood means in the context of globalized children's rights frameworks and in children's and adults' narratives equally. At the center of this exploration of what it means to be young and to grow older are questions of being and becoming, questions of personhood, questions of children as people who live in community and in relation with other people. And I dive into these questions of personhood and how it is constituted by zooming in on the ideas of children's responsibilities and respect alongside the social practice of greeting that illustrate the continuously changing meanings of being young very visibly. This shows quite nicely in this photo that you see here by 14-year-old Amir, in which he explained by writing on the back of it. This picture shows that the child greets their elder. This picture shows good manners. And the sense of being disciplined or of having good manners, Kwanadabu, which he mentions, as well as a sense of being pious, were two of the stable dimensions which those conceptualizations of what children explained for childhood to mean, that repeatedly occurred throughout their accounts. But it were also ideas of rights, of respect, and very centrally of responsibility that frequently appeared in children's elaborations on childhood, such as in 12-year-old Nafisa's photograph, with which she explains a child's right to both secular and religious education. Or as is visible in this drawing by 12-year-old Sohaila, in which she stressed particularly children's responsibility as a necessary building part of understanding childhood in Zanzibar. Sohaila wrote on her drawing, the responsibility to obey and to respect parents and elders, the child has the responsibility to obey their father, mother, and other elders, to not destroy their respectability. Then I move with these children's accounts of what childhood means and does into the second chapter, which is titled Childhood Without Punishment, and in which I focus specifically on the nuances that exist in Swahili in regard to how children themselves speak about discipline and punishment, and that shed light on the various discourses and interpretations that exist of and on physical chastisement in Zanzibar today. This often looked like the drawing by 12-year-old Husna, in which she depicts and explains her view that the child has the right to protection from abuse, like being hit or raped. Or like this photograph by Mohammed, who decided to reenact a situation of physical chastisement with his classmates. But this chapter includes also an exploration of the nuances between what children understand as hitting and smacking, kupiga and kuchapa, as well as how they use the frequently overlapping concepts of discipline and punishment, adabu and adhabu, which I suggest are absolutely key to understanding person formation in the archipelago. So by thinking very closely with the Swahili language and with children's as well as adults' uses of it in everyday life and on these themes, this chapter teases out where some of the boundaries between appropriate and excessive chastisement are drawn, the diversity of perspectives that exist on the practice, as well as where those very boundaries are fuzzy and unclear. In chapter 3, Children and Child Protection, I then shift the view toward the central object of this book, child protection. I do this by exploring how protection and childcare are understood in the context of 3 dominant discursive spheres or modes of knowing that influence everyday life in Zanzibar: the religious realm of Islam, the cultural domain of the Swahili, and the non-governmental realm of international development. And here too, I prioritize children's conceptualizations of care and safety, which sometimes looked like this photograph 14-year-old Naifa took, who demonstrates her understanding of safety by pointing to children's play and happiness. Or this other photograph by 14-year-old Nasra, explanations like hers that the child we see in this photo is doing work and fetching water with a canister that is too big for him, showed very clearly the breadth with which children thought about protection and care, and particularly beyond the protection from physical chastisement only. I then also draw on how adults make sense of protection and care according to those different domains, and with this variety of perspectives, continue to sketch out the frequent incompatibilities and tensions that I show throughout the book exist between religious, cultural, and aid conceptualizations and discourses on protection. In the 4th chapter, Child Protection in Zanzibar Schools, I then go more fully into the ethnography of child protection and explore the reception of Save the Children's positive discipline program, specifically from the perspectives of those children who were intended to benefit from it and the teachers who were the ones to apply it. The positive discipline program had the intention to eliminate the use of corporal punishment in schools and to establish alternatives to hitting, such as those we see in 15-year-old Malkia's drawing, in which she explains things like sweeping the school grounds or classrooms as such intended alternatives. The program had started under the names of Adabum Badala, alternative discipline or manners, and Adhabum Badala, alternative punishment, and was later renamed to Nidhamu Endelevu, which translates to something along the lines of sustainable discipline, but here discipline, Nidhamu, more in the sense of an external discipline and not as much of Adabuns in terms of an internal discipline. And the discrepancies between this terminology and the challenges inherent in the different translations of a protection approach into Swahili is something else that I frequently return to in the book. Now, in this chapter, I look specifically at the situation that was unfolding at the pilot schools where Save the Children were piloting their positive discipline program, where I was conducting my research. And I do this here in particular through an evaluation of thousands of small feedback notes on the implementation of positive discipline of the Positive Discipline program that were collected from children at the pilot schools over a period of 2 years. What these notes showed was that it was very clear that the implementation of the program had been much more complicated than it had been envisioned by child protection actors, and that it had indeed caused new challenges for children, which they spoke to directly in their feedback letters. While some of the children demanded that the cane should continue, or that it is actually good for them to be hit because then they listen, others claimed that they no longer wanted to be hit because they were hurting, that canes should be banned, and that they asked to not be hit in the head. However, what was most interesting and what came to light was that children were not just either supportive of or opposed to being hit, but that they were most importantly quite opposed to the positive discipline program itself, or at least in the way in which it was being implemented. And this became visible in children's reports of being taken away their money, of being asked to buy school utensils like brooms as a form of positive discipline, and that they perceived these alternatives to being hit as actually more complicated for them to deal with than being caned. While this replacement of physical punishment with other less visible forms of chastisement had of course not been intended by the child protection policymakers and implementers who imagined this program, it was ultimately what the approach translated into in practice. At the same time, and precisely because of the insights into children's and teachers' own refusal towards what was being implemented in the name of child protection, this chapter is also one that I think is the most productive and generative as an entry point into thinking differently about what child protection can and should be doing. In the 5th chapter, that is called Gender, Islam, and Child Protection, I then move into an exploration of gendered narratives around protection and safety, and consider, for example, what I propose is a feminization of child protection, and focus in particular on the often unintentional exclusion of boys from child protection discourses and practices. I zoom in here on the physical abuse of boys and how this taboo in society is a pressing protection issue, which then also points to the links between child protection and discourses of women's rights, and puts into question a frequent conceptual equation of women with children. But in this chapter, I also bring into dialogue Zanzibari notions of religion, here Islam, and the body in the public and private spheres by means of drawing on sheikhs and imams' uses of, for example, surah from the Quran, of certain hadith, of booklets such as the ones you see here, and their own Islamic guidelines about child rearing and assuring children's well-being, to offer other contextualizations for how boys and girls protection is approached and thought about in Zanzibar. Chapter 6, Decolonizing Child Protection, takes as a point of departure a brief conversation I had with a law professor at Zanzibar University, ZU in Tungu, where I was an affiliated researcher throughout my fieldwork period. After he had learned that I was doing research on child protection, his immediate reaction, which was something along the lines of, well, there is not only one way of protecting children for all countries, and me fully assuring him that I agreed with that, his refusal persisted, and he added, "You do not protect your children better than us. You just spoil them." And I use this brief exchange and his opposition towards child protection and my research on it, or rather his assumptions and association linked to that, as a starting point for a reflection on what a decolonization of child protection, in the sense of moving away from the you and the we who do things differently, that he refers to, what that could entail. So here I think with notions of decolonization as a form of liberation from ideas enforced upon people to create feelings of inferiority, or the suggested incapacity of already doing the work of protecting themselves or their children, about the possibility of less hegemonic child protection interventions. In the final chapter, Beyond Well-Being Towards Children, I draw together the main arguments of the book and link them to children's own ideas of themselves as being the nation of tomorrow, and in order to view protection practices as ultimately affecting children's futures and general well-being in their societies. To do that, I center the concept of empathy as an important one that children themselves think with when they, for example, like in this photograph by Hamil, make clear that they think about their own well-being and protection in the broadest and most relational way possible. I conclude the book in a way that is continuous with what children and adults have said, and end by proposing 4 essential focus areas for child protection policy innovation that may respond to the refusal and to the disconnections within child protection that I explored throughout the chapters. And these focus areas include assuring a focus on health and well-being. And here I address specifically the need to frame child protection as a health matter, because it is those terms that protection outside of policy thinking was most commonly linked to. Guaranteeing parental and community care. And here I mean the need to avoid working with groups in isolation to make sure that teachers and parents, that girls and boys, that religious leaders and ministry staff are all involved in the same conversation on equal parts. Preventing violence and poverty, meaning the need to address structural questions of poverty that contribute to harmful behavior towards children alongside addressing isolated issues like corporal punishment. And upholding morality and norms, meaning to work with and in awareness of the religious and spiritual contexts in which child protection interventions operate, and to take very seriously the constructive power of these ideas in the constitution of children's well-being. And then I closed the book with some insights from an evaluation that I did with the children themselves on the whole research project to really leave the last word to them. Now, what do I hope for the book to do? If anything, I really hope that this book will serve as a starting point for more critical discussions about child protection in the policy sense of the term and the protection of children as a general everyday practice, both among anthropologists and child protection practitioners who write about and who write and implement child protection policies. I hope that the book emphasizes the critical importance of not only taking very seriously the views of children who child protection policies and programs are written for and about, but also the need to permanently integrate spaces for collection and reflection of what it is that children have to say in and about international development, as well as routines of more genuinely adjusting policies on children's lives to children's lives, in order to avoid accidentally sustaining those harms that are intended to be eliminated in the first place. The book, I hope, makes a clear case for how much we can and should learn from children themselves about the political processes and realities that they are subjected to and even turn into the objects of, but which still usually tend to think about them without them. Put differently, I hope the book serves as a call for more anthropologists to think with childhood about politics and much more politically about children's lives. And finally, I'm left to say that I presently do feel quite hopeful because I see all of this is already somewhat happening, at least in the context of Zanzibar, where I was doing this work. And I'm grateful to be continuing a conversation with Save the Children in Zanzibar, which now almost spans 10 years, and which has been accompanied by an impressive openness by themselves to facing certain uncomfortable truths and to continuing to think together about how to take these insights forward to make them useful for other contexts. Now, I thank you for listening, and I'll be very grateful if you consider buying the book. If this is of interest to you, you can currently do so through Eurospan bookstores or other platforms, but with Eurospan, you can get a discount which will make it €26 instead of 33. And I'll end here with a photo of a particularly happy moment of the publishing process, which was about 2 months ago, when I was able to return to Zanzibar town and where Masomo Bookshop in Stone Town put the book on display. Thank you very much.
Oh, Franziska, this is wonderful. I think I'll just take it up from there. That is such a beautiful way to end your presentation of the book and to see it in Stone Town. What a wonderful summary of the book. And I know we have a group of colleagues, practitioners, scholars who deeply care about this issue today. So I'm going to set up a little bit of a discussion, but I would really love, and I know you would as well, to hear feedback, because this is not only the launch of a tremendous work of great scholarship, but it is also a way for us to engage those of us who care so much about these issues and be part of this process moving forward. So you had lots of applause. I don't know if you saw that while you were taking your PowerPoint down. So everyone applauded. Beautiful, beautiful presentation. And indeed, this book, I think I was trying to think how to structure my 10 minutes of discussant time here. And I would organize it according to 3 qualities: beauty, courage, and hope. So it's also quite nice that worked out nicely that your second to last slide was called hope, was unintended. But that's what I come away with when reading your book. And so first, beauty. This is a beautiful book. And there are not many academic scholarly books that we could say are beautiful, but it is beautifully written. There is an elegance in here that it goes through all of the chapters, and you bring the different, if you've spoken just now, the different literatures and your ways of engaging with very difficult, very problematic concepts, and you speak with them elegantly, with eloquence. And what I love most in this beauty is the way you have weaved in the voices of the children, the voices, the visions, the poems of the children, of the young people who participated, as well as with the other child protection actors, Zanzibari, Tanzanian, international government authorities. You bring in their voices in a way that clearly speaks to the trust that you had established with them, because I know that people don't say these kinds of things unless they really trust the person who they're speaking with. So I hope that they have been able to read your book, because everyone who has been quoted in here, I think, would be proud to be quoted in this and to be part of this process of advancing our field. So those are, for me, 3 qualities of what engaged scholarship really is. So indeed, everyone must read this book. You will enjoy reading it, I promise. In this beauty as well, there's the way you treat the notion of spiritual lives of children. And again, some scholars have worked on this. I think in the child protection field, this has been sort of usurped by spiritual, and when we're talking about Islam in particular, it's been sort of usurped by those who are talking about preventing extremist violence. And that is too bad, because the spiritual lives of children are so rich and have so much to offer us, also to just tell us about the ethical sort of environment of our time. And so by opening up this space to just let them speak about their own spirituality and what that means to them, this offers us new ways into understanding resilience, coping, sense-making, all these things that we know matter for children. And again, the problem of the international protection system is sort of hanging on to these notions, for example, of resilience, of which we know spirituality and meaning making is a key part. But again, we don't actually give the space. We just sort of tack on the label of resilience without allowing the space to go in there. So again, through your work, you show us that it is possible to probe this, and that children do have something to say about the meaning that they make in our lives. And in that process, they can really, they can give us clues on how to protect them better. So that's part 1 about why it's all so beautiful. Part two is the courage, and here is what I have a lot to say, because in this courage, this is groundbreaking work. It is uncomfortable work, right? And so like you, and like probably many of us on this call today, as a protection person, there is a lot that is assumed and unproblematized in the work of doing child protection, and you nicely force us to do it. And so as we read through, we're confronted, I was confronted with the assumptions, with the power that comes with the perspective of universalized norms. And I think the whole project of sort of, questioning normative discourse is part of where you did your postdoc and where the series in which this book is published. How do we look at the power of this idea of universalized? And so this was part of the liberal colonial project. This is at the heart of what the entire United Nations human rights architecture is about. And while in my heart of hearts, I would like to believe that we are all sort of universally equal, and the rest of it, the way that the entire world is organized economically, politically, in other words, other ways, shows us the cognitive dissonance. We believe it, and yet it's actually not happening. I now have an 8-year-old boy who I didn't have when I was a child protection professional. And so I think, child protection professionals at least need to be involved in the lives of children, because very much of what we think is so, what we assume is confronted when you're just in the face of children and their agencies. But this cognitive dissonance that is maintained when we keep holding on to the universalized norms, it is felt. Even if it's not seen, it is felt. And usually it's children themselves who will call us out on our dishonesty. If we go further, dishonesty, hypocrisy, because it's not what's happening, actually. This regime is not protecting children. And so what is the space? And so that's what I think our role here as scholars, as engaged scholars, it's part of bridging that and finding some kind of resonance so that the dissonance can go, because it's seen and it's felt through the children, I think, but also, for example, the law professor at Zanzibar University, who has been at the butt end of this and who continues to be faced with professionals. And you very nicely, you show the nuance of not just being Westerner and thus having this colonial approach, but that it's an approach that's not necessarily personalized, right? So you can be Tanzanian or Zanzibari and be in line with this universal normative system. So I think that very nice way of making that more complicated is also quite courageous. And what you've been doing, and you've been doing this for years now, is taking on the decolonization of this field. Now it's become politically acceptable. And everyone is now, and now we have syllabi at our universities, and there's journal articles talking about decolonization of child protection. You've been doing it for a long time already. So in this way, truly a precursor. But again, we must beware. Are we willing to take ourselves out of the power position when we're talking about decolonization? And are we willing to be humble and to be uncomfortable? Because that is what is required if we are going to be serious about decolonizing the space. So for all of us who are doing this work, let's join you, because you're doing it with courage, with humility, making us uncomfortable, holding that discomfort to show people that it's not so easy. And it should not be. We do not check the box that, yes, this is a decolonized child protection program. So there is a lot in there, a lot of humility that is required, that is a practice that we should truly to hold ourselves as well to account for in our field of research, and as we go out and try to apply it in practice. So that is part of the courage. You've said it just now in your presentation as well, that we can't look at protection issues sort of disaggregated from the broader continuum and the broader structures in which they exist. And your chapter in particular on gender and violence is really poignant, very powerful to see that sort of corporal punishment can only be seen within violence more generally. And what are the gender norms around it? What is it that sort of sustains something like corporal punishment within a bigger system in which different violences are accepted? And here we start looking into the structural violences. Well, as soon as we look at structural violences, we're also looking at the global system, the global political economy, which allows a place like Zanzibar to still be struggling on very basic poverty, access to global markets issues. And so we can see we start with the corporal punishment question, but suddenly it becomes a global issue, and we see how we're all part of that. So to the extent that we can keep that going in our work and our research, I think that's excellent. Within that bigger continuum, the idea of staying silent as being the most protective thing for some children when you are embedded in a system of such violence in different forms. That again, it hurts to hear that, but we know it might be true. And so here again, a simplified technical child protection response is not good enough and may be doing more harm. So again, how can we work with those truths, those painful truths in our work together going forward? And so finally, because I'm speaking for longer than I wanted to, I'm trying to talk slowly, but there is so much to say, why this is a hopeful book. Because you listen to the children, and the children tell you so much. And the children's notion of participation, again, you take us beyond the tokenistic participation, CRC sort of, let's hear the children, to the more African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of Children that sees participation as well as responsibility, and how children themselves want to be responsible, how they want to be engaged. They're asking us to listen to them and to, in partnership, work towards making their lives and their futures what they hope they could be, if only they could be. So in fact, I finished this book very hopeful, and I see that it is being done, that it has been done, and then it could be done. Of course, that will take a lot of time. It will take more than just you working on this. It will take all of us on this call to integrate this. But there is a way forward, and if I can just sort of close with this, as I invite all the others who are on this call to participate as well. I'd like to hear about how your engagement with the Save the Children staff on the ground when you went back was, because there is some hard honesty in this book, and perhaps you've sort of come up with some tips for those of us here on how we can truly stay true to our research and can keep the sort of the engagement going in ways that really do make a difference in the lives of children. So that's it in terms of my discussion. There was probably a lot in there, but I'm really grateful to you for having asked me to read this and to share my reflections with you. And I thank all of you for now joining in this conversation.
Wow, Claudia, thank you so much. The main thing I have to say, and I don't want to say much, but we haven't spoken about this, but I could not have imagined a beautiful reader. So thank you for reading it in the way that you read it, and for understanding it in the way that I try to put it together and to really bring out those complexities and those nuances, and for showing me that it can be understood in the way that I hoped for it to come across. And yeah, thank you for this incredibly beautiful comment. I'm very humbled and just surprised and grateful in the most positive way. And I'll just say briefly about going back to Zanzibar now 2 months ago was such a critical moment in time, and kind of with it almost being 10 years now, really reflected on the the multitude of the absolute large number of people I've been working with this in Zanzibar, the different people who have been leading the Save the Children field office in Zanzibar, the different people who have worked as staff with Save the Children, the people who have changed in the ministries, the high fluctuation of people going in and out, and of the most, for me, it being the most key thing to not get tired of continuing to engage in this conversation and to restart it again and again, and to explain again and again what the aim and the purpose and the hope of this work really is, and to just continue to do that. And we're now at a point where we had several meetings when I was there about 2 months ago, and we're now speaking together with the ministry about how to take these insights forward and how to scale it up, and particularly for the Zanzibari child protection actors in the ministries with SAFE and different fields to make those decisions, and to think about how to think about these things politically, locally in that space. So that is currently happening, and I'm most excited to see where we'll be in another 10 years' time. And I would be most grateful to see many of the faces of the people who have joined today, and to hear from others who have known of this work for a long time, and who have been critical parts of also making it come together. So I invite you, welcome you to turn on your cameras if you like, and to say hi, really.